Hello everyone, welcome to this. This is our fifth in a series of webinars that we're hosting as part of our annual user community symposium. Just a quick note to say that I am recording the webinar. I'm really happy to be joined by Howard Dickel, CEO of Step5 Group, and his colleague Angela Johnson, who's a knowledge management consultant at Step5. Hi to you both. Before I hand you over to Howard and Angela, just got a quick couple of updates. So we are running a series of webinars this week. We're on day 3, so a few have passed, but on Monday we had a good webinar from Oxford Brookes University talking about how they use MethoGrid to assure projects they're running there and where they're building new student halls of residence, etc. We had a quick review of our releases in 2021. We've had an interesting webinar from a company called Future Shift about how they use MethoGrid for their version of platform-led consulting to get small and medium-sized businesses through the B Corp certification. MGI Learning shared their experience of implementing MethoGrid very recently with our own consulting team. And today we've got this one with Step 5. Then at 4 o'clock, you can join me to go through the 2022 product roadmap, workshop that, go through a few ideas we've got. And then tomorrow at 2, we have Eco Sulis, who are rewilding and ecological experts, talking about how to reduce the ecological impact of large-scale construction engineering projects. And we're closing at 4 o'clock tomorrow with the future of project assurance with Don Morehouse and one of our senior developers looking at how machine learning and AI can impact project assurance in the future. If any of those sound interesting, you can find them at methogrid.com/webinars. You can sign up for any of the ones that are upcoming, and any that you've missed, you can watch on demand there as videos. They're up. Last quick update. So if you do have any questions as Howard and Angela are going through, you can post questions into a little tool we're using called Slido. I'm just going to post that link into the Teams chat, so you can just follow it direct there. If you just follow that link, you'll come to a page and you can post questions in there. You can kind of thumbs up any questions that anyone asks that you think are interesting, you'd like to be answered. And then at the end of this webinar, we'll go through any questions we've got. Okay, over to you, Howard.
Great, thanks, Jody, and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this, the latest in the MethoGrid seminar series. So my name's Howard Dickel. I'm the CEO of a digital transformation program delivery organisation called Step5. Between myself and Angela, who Jody's also already introduced as well, we're just going to spend a bit of time talking to you about our experience of working with MethoGrid and the work we've done to build out MethoGrid to support the delivery of large programs, which is fundamentally the core of our business. What we're going to do in terms of shaping and framing the conversation is I'll give you just a little bit of background into Step5 as a business and cover the delivery challenges effectively that we had, which really then should just frame what we then started to do with MethoGrid. And then I'll pass to Angela, who heads up our knowledge management practice within Step5, to talk through what we've done, what we've learned along the way, and share some of those tips. Obviously, feel free to use the Slido app to ask any questions, and then I'll just come back right at the end of the presentation just to talk about kind of what we do next as an organisation. So if I just go on to the next slide, I just need to make sure I can progress the slide on. Good, yeah. Okay, so a bit of background on Step5, and I won't spend too much time on this, but it just to contextualise things. So we are a digital transformation consultancy business, and obviously digital transformation is a widely used and probably, dare I say, overused phrase in the market these days. But in simple terms, we are a project and program management consultancy who deliver large, complex programs which have a fair amount of digital as part of them. So it might be working with a customer's ERP transition from on-premises to the cloud, or from one major systems provider to another, or it might be restructuring, helping the customer restructure their business around a new operating model, or as a result of a significant merger or acquisition. So we were established in 2014, and over the last 7 years, we've grown the business at an average annual rate of about 20%. So it's a fairly rapid growth rate. And this year we'll exit with revenues just about the £16 million mark. So that is almost entirely around consulting and project revenues. The other things that we also, I just wanted to frame things really are that we've completed probably over that 7-year period about 150 discrete projects and programs, roughly 50-50 across the private and public sectors. Generally, we operate mostly in the UK, where we've done some work in Europe. We currently have, and this is probably most pertinent to this presentation, we have about 90 people in the business as it stands, and that's a split between permanent employees and a long-term associate network. And we last November 2020, so just coming up to a year ago now, we were acquired by a company called TXM, which stands for the Extra Mile, a large recruitment and resourcing business with turnover about £250 million a year globally, to act as their digital transformation core within their business. So they historically have done a lot of recruitment and resourcing work. They want to move into consulting and projects, and they also wanted to have a credible partner and a credible part of their organisation in that digital transformation space. And that's relevant when I talk about some of the challenges in a minute. So that's a little bit about us. In terms of the challenge, they really come down to three key strands really. First one was all about standardization. So as you can imagine, an organization that's grown 20% compound through both a permanent and an associate network over the last 7 years, if I as CEO reflect on this just over a year ago, we were looking at things and saying, okay, how do we sustain that growth, and how do we make sure that as we scale, we're improving the productivity and efficiency of our workforce and applying best practice? Because I think historically we had different flavors of a step 5 engagement in terms of methods and frameworks and so on and so forth, which then leads me on to the next point. So one was this kind of standardization to drive productivity and efficiency. Second one was a customer experience driver. So as a result of that growth, that pretty rapid growth, each customer experience was slightly different. So the cultural and behavioral experience with Step 5 was very consistent. We've always worked with, either recruited permanently or worked with associates who are very like-minded and have a huge amount of experience. It's generally a personal referral model that brings extra people into the business. However, the customer experience would vary depending on which lead consultants or groups of consultants you had in a team. So we were very keen to start to have a framework and an approach and a platform that could support us driving a consistent and very high quality customer experience, because obviously in the consulting and professional services world, it's all about the quality of that experience. And then the final thing was looking at how do we then capture a huge amount of intellectual property. If we've got 90 people in the business, on average, our workforce have 20 years plus of real life major programs delivery experience. That's a vast amount of intellectual property, which we need to harvest, we need to standardize, and then we need to maintain. And obviously, if we harvest and maintain that intellectual property, that has real value, and it has real value not only for Step 5, but as I said, within the group that have been acquired, that have acquired Step 5 as well. So there was a real financial driver as well for our group parent to start to look at, not only do we apply this across Step 5, but how do we then start to apply that across the other 18 operating companies within the group who do, to varying degrees, projects and programs work. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavour of kind of the background to the company and the key drivers. So what I'm going to do now is pass over to Angela to talk you through kind of, okay, so what did we do next? So Angela, over to you.
Great, thank you. So we decided Method Grid was the ideal solution for us, and I'm the part-time knowledge manager that actually controls the grids. So I started working on Method Grid around April this year. So we've quite an intensive program over the last few months to pull together all the various disciplines that we had across programs and projects and portfolio even. So far we've created 17 grids in total. We've got 10 that have been signed off complete, and we've 5 still in progress, and we've actually got 3 new ones on the go as well. So we're not live as such at the moment with the whole business, with the 90 people we have at the moment, but we'll share our roadmap of how we're going to start rolling that out at the end, and Howard will go through that with you. So as Howard said, we've got an awful lot of experience within Step5, and there's a lot of disciplines around portfolio program management. So if you look at some of these, we looked at things like business change management, because when we're working with clients, quite often they may not have the experience of business change, but they have to do their own business change as well. So this is a brilliant discipline for people to be able to share some of our knowledge and templates and everything else that goes with it. Service transition, we'd just come out of transition of a really major program in June last year, so there's an awful lot of learning we put into that. And then we've got some that cross all of the grids, so things like planning standards, reporting control, PMO delivery and support, digital transformation, which I know that's one of our babies. It's one we've done an awful lot, and that's a really good grid to have got down there. But it links in again to PMO, it links into planning, it links into risk. Got ITSM, which is, for those that don't know, is IT service management. So we did use as a building block what Method Grid had already put in there, which was brilliant. It was one of those standard grids that they do as an example. So we took that and then we've tailored it to ours, and we've added different templates and, from the experience of the team. Service recovery, because again, it's something that we get asked to do quite frequently, is the service is in a challenging position and go in and start a recovery process. Cloud migration, which is very popular at the moment, and the others are target operating model, architectural governance and compliance, and Step 5 propositions. I missed out the top one. I'll come back to that because, as Howard mentioned, when we were associated with the TXM group, there were different ways of working with Step 5 and TXM. So that was a great place to actually start to say, right, okay, how do we merge these two ways of working together? And out of that came 4 onboarding grids, which helps our associates to onboard. It was around client invoicing and it was around associate invoicing. And they're really secure grids now that we, as the two merge together, we know exactly how to work in one way and one consistent way as well. I mentioned there were 3 new ones. We've got risk management, program assurance, and portfolio management, and all 3 we're sort of currently building at the moment. So yeah, they'll progress, but we'll hopefully have them ready for January for when we launch. So we'll share some of the lessons that we've learned on the way to getting where we've got to with all these grids. Because I thought rather than go into each grid, we'll share with you some of the things that we've kind of learned and our experiences of certain things. So first one, when we'll talk about what we learned, we got a lot of the experience from the team, but they weren't fully experienced in Method Grid. So one of the things we thought we'd do, I went through, I learned the application first thoroughly, and Jody was fantastic for that and the support he gave. And then I went through with each one of the builders and how they would actually pull the grid together. And it was a very supportive, scaffolded process. It wasn't just left to their own devices. And we did it in 3 waves. So we did it where wave 1 would be, we would just get the elements in there. So we'd get each of the building blocks in there and we'd give it a title and we'd make sure it fit in the right way. Then we went on to the second wave, was to put the narrative into each of the elements. So get all the text in there, all the descriptions in there. And then in wave 3, we then went on to, right, okay, now let's look at the templates. We kind of knew we had a risk around the templates, that we knew there would be maybe 2, 3, maybe 10 different people saying, I've got the best template. So that was the way we thought, well, we'll leave that till last, and then we can do the negotiation of which is the best practice and the best way of working. So on this particular slide, you'll see we put, again, we used what was already there with Method Grid training, and it's how to actually build a Method Grid. And we made sure that we actually had that on the front page of everybody's dashboard, so that they could actually, if they had a question, they could always go to that first. And if that didn't work, then they could come to me and I'd answer the question for them. And I think that really did work well, that people built their experience then on what they needed to do with Method Grid. The next lesson was the logo. I remember Howard asking one day, "Where's the logo?" And I thought, oh, good question. So we all know that you can tailor Method Grid, and there's where I've got the little red line at the top, you'll see that's where the logo is. But the minute you go into an element, you kind of lose the logo and you almost lose the essence of where are you, especially if it's just narrative that's in there. So we felt that we would put an image block in there, and we put Step 5 in there, because then it brings it to life, the page, but it's great for our clients as well, because they feel very much it's part of what we offer. So it's very simple. It's an image block that we've put in there, and then we import the image into it. So that was one of our lessons. Another of our lessons was that, as Howard said, we've got an associate team. So there's a lot of people within that team. And initially we were finding that we were putting experts and client examples within the blocks, within the elements, but then found that two reasons we actually had to kind of change that. One reason was that we didn't want our experts to be bombarded with, asking questions all the time on that particular grid, but also it enabled us to centralize it. So we put a block, as in the experts element, within a stage, which is the guidance and documentation, because then it allows us to update that experts list centrally within SharePoint and not within the actual grid itself. So we don't have to anymore update lots and lots of the different elements which have the experts attached to them. We just update it centrally, and we've got all that experience there in a central place. And if that person is busy or bombarded with information, then we can manage it better, because we can say, well, an alternative is please contact, and another contact within there. The client examples was interesting because, again, as Howard said, we work with government, and most of the people that work within the organisation have to have security clearance. So one thing we didn't want to do is just give out client examples and then not have control of them. So each one of the grid owners has control of those client examples. So if somebody really does need to have a look through and say, well, what did we do with X client? Then they can be in a controlled way and not in just a, oh, let me open up this slide deck and it has information in there. I mean, even the examples we've got, we do take out all the client specific data, but it's still there as an example. So that's just our way of working. We're doing it centrally now. And again, that's in SharePoint, and it tells you who you can contact if you want an example. So the templates are within the grid, but if you want a completed template, so you want to know what it looked like in a completed product, then you'd contact the process owner. Okay, so another one of our lessons was consistency. And again, I think this was, as soon as we started working with project managers, they all had a different way. So some would call it definition, some would call it startup, then initiation or discovery, and so on. And everybody had a slightly different flavour to what the stages were. And because we were linking grids, so we were going from maybe transformation and then linking into PMO and then linking into planning, we wanted consistency. So we defined a set of stages at the top where 90% of the time we stick to. So these are definition, initiation, planning, execution, monitoring and control, and closing. And they seem to fit quite well across most grids. Occasionally it's slightly different, like business change, because we do align with ProSci and ADCAR. So that is slightly different, but the majority of the time we actually stick to those stages and that consistency. We can change the themes down the left-hand side, but yes, stages, we try and encourage our builders to stay as they are. Okay, another lesson learned was just creating a templated element and putting that at the very beginning of any grid that we were starting off with. And you'll notice on this one, I think you'll see you've got purpose, you've got principles, just the common sort of things, templates, but we actually added in acceptance criteria as well, because majority of the time we have to produce product description for any product that we are then going to deliver. So product descriptions becomes very important to pull together, and at some point in the future we will add a template of product descriptions into each of these elements where it is a particular product. But just as an interim, we've put in acceptance criteria, because that then helps when somebody is writing a product description, that they can immediately look at what's the acceptance criteria for this particular element. And it takes 2 minutes to just copy and paste it into whatever the product description might be related to. Acceptance criteria can take a while, and it's amazing sometimes how not everybody understands what it is. So it just really helped to actually put that in there and put a list of statements that then allows an approver to then look back and say, yeah, actually, I can tick these boxes and say this product has actually met the criteria it was meant to have met in the first place. So that's why we put that in there, and I think that has really helped us as well. Okay, so our next lessons learnt was this was great, and I know Jody said this was already in the method grid, but we didn't realise, and it wasn't until I think one of the changes not too long ago, where you could then link to another grid very easily rather than link to an element. I think they made it very simple to be able to do, and we've utilised that quite a lot, and it just reduces so much duplication. Because when you look at something like digital transformation, or you look at cloud migration, you will have very similar elements that you were going through with PMO, with planning, with risks. All of those are very, very similar. And actually it helps us then, instead of creating a duplicate grid every time, we just have the grid and then actually put an element in there that says, for anything else that's to do with PMO or the governance, then link out to the actual grid. It just enables us to keep that up to date and keep it consistent again, which is what we've really tried to do with a lot of this, because I think we were building so many different grids, as I said before, across so many disciplines. This has really helped us as well to just be able to have that consistency across the piece. And I think the more grids we build, the more ideas people have. And I think that's the one thing you almost have to be aware of, is that when you do start to build out with these grids, you will find that people will come along and go, oh, what about this one? And we had one, what about another one? What about risk assurance and various other things? And you will get loads of ideas, and it's managing those ideas and making sure that they actually do fit in with the whole portfolio that we've got within Method Grid. And I think one thing that I found was really useful this week was one of our associates was with a client, and he very quickly needed to get access to some documentation that he could use as a template, and he contacted us, and we were able to point him in the right direction immediately and say, yeah, it's in that grid, that might be able to help you, or this might be able to. And it just, when you consider how much time that probably saved him in otherwise trying to create a document, work out what he needed within that document, he was able to have a look at the ones that are already there and say, well, actually, how do we just adapt what we've already got? So it's a fabulous way of harnessing all that knowledge into one place. Just before I move on, I think you do get challenges with, particularly, I think the ones we had challenges with, service recovery was one of them. And that's because we had probably 5, maybe 6 service managers, all different ways of wanting to see the end result. But what I found again was get some regular meetings in there and start to discuss each week. And we started that to begin with, and then we found in the early stages it was a bit like a committee that nobody could make a decision on anything. And what we then changed was we said, right, okay, let's look at Method Grid itself, and each one of the stages, each service manager took a stage and updated what they thought was accurate on that stage. And then we looked across the way and then said, well, right, how do we link these together so that there's consistency? And that worked so much better. So each person had accountability for a small part of the grid when you have a large number of people who want to input it, rather than actually just that committee you have at the beginning where nobody makes a decision and you don't move on. So that worked particularly well. And what I did within the grid is put the title of the stage and then put the person's name next to it. So there was no ambiguity. They knew exactly which grid they were, or which stage they were working on. And it saved an awful lot of time. We got to the end result and we got that signed off and they were happy with it. So again, that's just a little tip for if you have a lot of people actually input into something like one of the grids. So Howard, I think that's it from me, and I think that's handing back over to you for the future.
Just come off mute. Hopefully you can hear me okay. So just before I talk to the future roadmap, just to reinforce a couple of things from my perspective as CEO. I think the first thing is what it's also driven in our business is a bit of an organisational evolution conversation around the concept of process or capability leads. So people who we've always seen as the sort of informal experts in our business around some of these areas, but which are now that's starting to be formalised. And actually, if we hadn't gone through this process, I'm not sure we would have had the conversation quite so soon. I think that's one sort of ancillary piece. A couple of other things for me. You do need to invest in somebody, I think, in this knowledge management space. We're very lucky to have Angela in our organisation. You know, she's part-time at the moment because that works for us and it works for Angela, but also because Angela churns out stuff like faster than anyone else you've ever worked with. But if we didn't have Angela in that space, I do wonder how far we would have got, because you need somebody to focus it on it. And I think also that what Angela's learned through this process, which I'm not sure came through quite as clearly as I see it, is that because you've got so many people with so many different opinions, I think increasingly when we decide to work on a new grid or a framework or a method, Angela generally drafts a kind of starter for 10, as I would call it, based on, you know, industry best practice and some initial conversations, and then plays it back so that you don't end up by trying to design a grid by committee. It's far better to have something that's 60%-ish correct, and then you adopt it and adapt it. So I think that's a really key point. I think Angela talked on the point. I think we're now starting to, although we haven't formally launched, we're starting to get a lot of interest in this, and so people are coming up with a new grid. So the three new ones that Angela spoke about have come out of people seeing what we're already doing. Oh, well, wouldn't it be good if? What about this? What about that? So a couple of things from our perspective. In our roadmap, basically, we are finalising that long list of grids. We've just got the last few bits to follow through that Angela started with, and we will be going for a launch in January. We actually took a conscious decision not to launch this side of Christmas. You know, everyone's frazzled. It's been a heck of a year for us business-wise. People are still getting to grips with hybrid ways of working and everything else. So our view was, although we could have launched pre-Christmas, we're going to give people a bit of mental headspace, and then we'll effectively have a program which is a general launch as our first step. Webinars in the early part of the new year across our organisation. Don't forget, it's 90 people strong. More in-depth walkthroughs for people that we're now starting to cluster around communities, so communities of practice. The other key thing I just wanted to say about this as well, from a knowledge management perspective, we have to reinforce this isn't a do once and leave activity. So we're actually building this into some of our core back-end processes. So every new piece of client work now, our intention when we launch in January will be that there is a mobilization phase, obviously, and we will actually consider the full list of grids and go for this client engagement, which of the grids do we think will be appropriate, and make sure we steer and reinforce to the engagement lead. And then probably even more valuable, I think, at the end of either a key stage or final project close down, we will also then do effectively the classic close down and lessons learned, but part of the lessons learned will be to feed back into the grids what worked, what didn't work, what's been produced that takes the quality a little bit a step further or is more relevant, that we can feed back in. And again, without somebody in that knowledge management role, I think it will be very hard to control that activity. And then finally, what we want to do is start to take the grids more aggressively out into our client base. So at the moment, it's very much going to be positioned in the first instance as a tool that we use, but I can see huge value, particularly with the branding around it, of we start to expose this very directly with our key clients, either as a shared client resource or as part of the sales pitch, to show the depth and the breadth of talent in the organisation and the way we've managed that. So hopefully we've been able to share with you a bit of a journey that we've been on. Our engagement with MethodGrid as a company has been for about the last 15 months. I think MethodGrid is one of those fantastic tools which is incredibly simple to get started. You can be putting grids together within a matter of minutes, but then there's huge power and depth and breadth in it because it's very flexible. And so you start off in one direction and you get to use it in a completely different way once you've got some familiarity. And I think that's been proven on some of the webinars that have already been on this week. And I know it will be, having attended a similar forum like this a year ago. So that's really all I would say in terms of our learnings and experience. And I think I'll just take us to our final slide just to remind people that they can answer questions, and Andrew and I are available now for as long as you need us to answer any that you want to talk through.
That's great. Thanks both. Some really valuable stuff in there. I hope everyone got something out of it. If you do have a question, it's just if you go to that link, it's in the chat actually of Teams. If you just want something to click on, don't think you can click on the slide. But I do have two questions. So the first I've got is, which MethodGrid features did you find the most useful when building out the grids, if you had to pick a couple?
So, Angela, I'm going to pass that to you, obviously, as our expert.
No problem. Yeah, I think one of the first things I think people quite often are daunted by just writing down what they do and how they do it. And I think that's where MethodGrid almost brings Visio and Excel, but in a more interactive way together. Because we were able to say, okay, you know, when my first conversation with someone is, well, you know, let's start with what kind of stages and what kind of themes have we got, and they're pretty straightforward to get down. But then when you get to the elements, they then start to think about, oh yeah, what do I do? And the beauty of being able to put in, yeah, I do such and such, and then be able to move it around was invaluable, because just it was almost like just dumping everything they know into into the grid, but then moving it around until it makes absolute sense. And this has happened quite a lot with the assurance one, because you know how pedantic assurance can be, and that's been fantastic. I've been working with the assurance guys, and they dropped everything in probably about a week ago, and then reviewed it, and then came back and went, actually, we need to move it all around a bit, and we need to do various different things. So that's where we've started to move it around, and it's just that flexibility of being able to move things. If you had something like, even, you know, something like Excel, you're having to copy and paste and cut and paste and everything else, and you just haven't got any of that. It's just so easy to move things around, and when they see it, then it brings it to life. So you then find that the process owners looking at it and go, yeah, this is great, but it also shows them if they've missed things as well, which is fabulous. So yeah, I think that just that flexibility of being able to move things and don't get too. I remember Howard saying to me in the early days, he said, just get 80%, don't go for the 100. And I thought, yeah, absolutely right. Just drop everything in and then move it around, make sure it works, make sure it flows. And then the reviews actually that come out at the end of it are the ones where we do get we polish it and make it better. So yeah, that's what I'd say is the best.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Angela. I hope that answered the question. I've got a second one. So if you had to choose one in terms of project delivery and assurance, what would be the main benefit you're hoping to see from using MethodGrid?
So let me answer this one. So I think it's, for me, I think it's two things. I think, and it's definitely around sort of project delivery. I think that the key benefits that I can see already coming out of this are, one, much better efficiency and effectiveness. So as we, particularly where we're on a pretty aggressive growth curve, we're bringing people into the business relatively quickly and straight into projects and programs. So having someone who doesn't have to ask around, or worse, develop their own version of something that we already do better elsewhere in Step 5. I think so. There's definitely an efficiency and effectiveness, and then from that comes the all-important customer experience. I mean, ultimately, professional services of any kind, but particularly I think consulting and project delivery, it's all about obviously there's the outcome, but your rating from your client, ultimately there's a multiplier around the quality of the experience. And I think being able to have a set of standards that drive quality in terms of the first engagement, but more importantly, we then have a continuous improvement cycle. So at the end of a stage or the end of an engagement, we actually go back round the board and say, well, actually on this method, these bits were really good, but actually this bit really needs adapting, or we come up with a much better idea, and then you roll that back across. So that's a user experience benefit. So I think it's the two really, I think together would be my view, Jody, I think.
That's great. Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, they both tie up quite nicely, don't they? Because to Angela's point, I mean, the simplicity, and we've tried to keep everything as simple as possible, of delivering a grid and then bringing back the lessons learned. And again, you just move things around in that original master grid, and you're good to go. Your lessons learned have been reabsorbed into your knowledge, and it's continuous improvement.
Yeah.
There's no other questions at the moment. I'm gonna leave it open up there just in case anyone else does have a question. I will just say I noticed a couple of people came in kind of halfway through. So if you did miss anything, this will be available to watch as a recording on our website. Probably be tomorrow morning sometime. It'll be available. Be on methodgrid.com/webinars, and you can just watch this webinar as a replay at your leisure. Okay. Well, if there's no further questions, it just remains for me to say thank you very much to Angela and Howard. Thanks, guys.
A pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks for everyone coming. And we'll sign off. So
right.
Bye for now.
Thanks a lot. Cheers, guys.
Thanks.